Sunday's rally comes after more than a month of mass demonstrations across that country. For more now, we are joined by Stephen Fish in Tampa, Florida. He studies democracy and regime change in developing and post-communist countries, and he is a political science professor at the University of California, Berkeley. Stephen, welcome and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Susan.
Well, it seems like these demonstrations have been simmering for quite some time, but they now seem to have been ignited by the beating of this investigative journalist, Tatiana Chernobyl.
Yes, they have. Her beating really does bring out the fact that these demonstrators are not concerned only with the issue of whether Ukraine will be closer to Russia or closer to Europe, but the bigger issue of democracy and human rights and corruption in Ukraine. And those are issues that unite Ukrainians really across different lines of thinking about the Russia versus Europe question.
The Ukrainian government has been saying all along that it is aligning itself with Russia in part because of the energy issue. Is this true?
I think it is true. I mean, Ukraine is very dependent on Russia for its energy, and Russia has come up with a pretty sweet deal for Ukraine on this in order to keep them from getting closer to Europe. A big subsidy that is going to translate into lower energy prices for Ukrainian industrialists who produce using a lot of energy, and for Ukrainian consumers of gas and oil. So this is a pretty good deal for Ukraine in strictly economic terms. Of course, that's not going to placate or satisfy the demonstrators who are against the government, because this is not just about economics for them. It's about whether Ukraine is going to throw its lot in with Europe or throw its lot in with Russia. And many Ukrainians are in favor of very clearly opting for Europe, and they are not going to be placated by these things that Russia has offered Ukraine in strictly economic terms.
Is the country divided in some parts as to whether it supports lining itself with Russia or the EU?
Yes, Ukraine is divided on this issue. Some Ukrainians, especially those who speak Russian as their first language and who live in the southern and eastern parts of the country, tend to favor closer relations with Russia. Many people who live in the western Ukraine, whose mother tongue is Ukrainian as opposed to Russian, tend to favor closer relations with Russia. That said, from region to region, you'll find people who are in favor of closer relations with Russia, closer relations with Europe. It's not a strictly geographical divide, but the divide is there. Of course, most Ukrainians would like to have it both ways. They would like good relations with Europe and good relations with Russia. This is one of those times, though, when, due to the way President Putin of Russia framed the issue, the Ukrainian government really needs to decide, because Putin said, you go in for the European Association Agreement and we are going to do bad things to you economically. You go with us and we're going to help you a lot with these subsidies on energy.
And finally, Stephen, just in a nutshell, please tell us what the overall obvious advantages are in aligning itself with the EU for the people in Ukraine.
Well, the long-term advantages are really considerable. The EU is an enormous market. Ukraine is a big agricultural producer, potentially a big exporter to European markets. This has big advantages potentially for some Ukrainian producers in some sectors, for Ukrainian consumers, all the usual advantages that accrue to a country from joining the European Union or at least getting closer to Europe. That said, the European Union is being more demanding up front with the Ukrainian government about what it needs to do to get its own economic house in order. One advantage from the standpoint of the Ukrainian government, of President Yanukovych now, is that President Putin of Russia is not making those demands. So that's one reason why Yanukovych and his people actually favor the agreement with Russia.
Stephen Fish, live in Tampa, Florida. Thank you for joining us.